that here is an institute or an institution where religion, culture and education get intermingled, and you get the feeling that this is one of the best attributes that India has given to the world. I hope this will continue for all time to come. I think that the Institute of Culture represents the Trinity in full measure. I have now spent exactly 4 years in Bengal in my present capacity. I have participated in several functions involving the Ramakrishna Math and Mission. I think 2 days ago I was at Belur Math in this connection. And while I think all Indians have been fascinated by the Holy Trinity of Sri Ramakrishna, Ma Sharda Devi and Swami Vivekananda, but living in Bengal, participating in the various functions from time to time, one gets to really understand what the Trinity stood for. I have come to appreciate and perhaps I would say understand their greatness as well as their impact. Most of all, I'm not a scholar or a savant, but most of all I would like to say, I have come to believe that there could be no better description of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa than that he symbolized the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad's description of religion as, and I quote, the honeyed essence of all creation. And he was the quintessence of the beauty of holiness. Swami Maharaj, I salute you for carrying on this tradition. As I said, it's not my intention to stand between you and Dr. Jawahar Sarkar's oration, but I still wish to adumbrate that in a world increasingly fragmented on the basis of power blocks, economic disparities, different religions and subdivisions within the same religion, there is increasing need for the voice of sanity to be heard. Only then can humanity hope to survive in peace and harmony. That is the voice of sanity that we all long for. This was the message that Swami Vivekananda put forward loud and clear in the World Parliaments of Religion in Chicago in 1893. 3 years after his Chicago address, in early 1897, Swamiji set about the task of creating the Ramakrishna Math and Mission and launched a new order which could carry forward his message, which highlighted the interface between religion and social and economic uplift. Where else in the world could you have found someone who could combine the best of humanity? As the foremost Upanishad sphere, his message to humanity was harmony. His idea was service of God in man. His agenda was comprehensive and his purpose revolutionary. Only 2 days back, inaugurating the international seminar on the relevance of Swami Vivekananda's message in the 21st century, I had stressed on these aspects and had stated that the Ramakrishna Mission and Order was not merely the flag bearer of Hinduism, but had emerged as a conscience keeper of Indian society. I feel this and I stress this even more here at this moment. Holy monks, ladies and gentlemen, I shall now step aside so that you might listen to the erudite speaker of this morning, Sri Jawahar Sarkar. Thank you.
I now make a humble request to Mr. Jawahar Sarkar to give his Foundation Day oration.
Excellency, the Governor of West Bengal, Mr. Narayanan, respected Swami Supananandaji, Swami Ishakmananda. It's pleasant surprise to see you here from Chicago. I could see only a few from the audience, but I pick and choose my most favorite Didi Amula. Amula Shankar is here, well past 90. I don't know how she makes it. Dr. A.K. Sharma, sir, I can see you from the light notwithstanding. Dr. Basurai Chaudhary, Vice Chancellor, Rabindra Bharati, most respected monks, most respected seniors, and my friends. It's indeed a very great honor for a local boy of Calcutta who just grew up a kilometer away, who has spent a better part of his life studying in this library, to be called here to speak before such an august audience. I don't deserve it, but since it has been given, I didn't miss it. I thank the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture for this indeed unique honor. The topic that I've selected today is being given in a booklet which has a very funny ending. I'll tell you about it. I congratulate the mission and its military efficiency for being able to print it out in less than 1 day. I could somehow finalize it only 1 day before. The topic that we selected today is something to do with what India is all about. We look at India as a product, and when we look back at about 6 or 7 decades, this was not the same India. There are many seniors here in the audience who recall. We will see with an amazement how India has emerged from a country that was tormented by internal convulsions and external threats to be ranked among the topmost countries in the world. The entire picture has changed so dramatically. But more important than the economic or the political status that India has been conferred lies the fact that India has won today without any shadow of doubt. It was not the same 50, 60 years earlier. The 21st century belongs to Asia, and that is a done deal. And when we talk of Asia, it will be basically one between China and India. I'm not romanticizing our position. I'm just stating what is accepted to be a fact, the temporary hiccups of the economy notwithstanding. The question is, how did this India, which is so proud of its high seat in the Assembly of Nations of the world, emerge as a cohesive nation? Let us look back at the stroke of midnight on the 14th, 15th of August, when this nation was born, a memorable period that comes but once in a nation's lifetime. It was the most challenging of times, as it was a bleeding baby that had been saviored from its sibling. But we were in the midst of violence, confusion, rioting. Churchill's very famous word hit us in the ear even now, and this was, in a few years hence, no trace will remain, for anarchy will lead to internecine warfare. That was Churchill's prediction. He was proved to be wrong. The challenge was even greater because 565 princely states and 14 British provinces, with their multiplicity of cultural identities, languages, loyalties, had to be brought together. Now, while we can move, I'll make 2 more comments about what the British friends had to speak about us. One is in 1883 by Seeley, who said, India is only a geographical expression, like Europe or Africa. It does not make the territory of a nation and a language, but the territory of many, many nations. His friend John Strachey, who's often quoted, he writes in 1885, there was never an India, no Indian nation, no people of India. We wish we could knock at their graves. But in 1947, 1950s, if you recall, among those who are my age or senior to me, we used to refer to each other as Madrasi, Bengali, Hindustani, Sikh, Sardar, etc. My submission here is that while the British Post and Telegraph, the British bayonets and cantonments, their ICS and the district magistrates and the imperial police, their English language had managed, and their education system had managed to get us physically closer together, there was an emotional bonding that was missing, except in the small group that had participated in the national movement. Let us not over-romanticize our participation, because much of India's population was not directly involved in a movement from which they would gain. Let us look at it unemotionally. Except that group that had come together and who had influenced quite a lot of others, we were still talking in terms of languages, regions, cultures. There are many factors that played a role to bring India together. Today I'll focus only on one of them. And one of them is Akashvani or AIR's Vivid Bharati service. I've picked and choose because it's very difficult to go into long, open-ended discussions. My submission is that this particular service succeeded in doing more for the popularization of colloquial Hindi and bringing an emotional unity within India that the protagonist of Sanskritic Hindi would never even dream of. More interesting was that it was done smoothly, effectively, and with popularity. Now let us look back to history. This lecture is there with you, so it said. The birth of Vivid Bharati was not a creation of Akashvani or the bureaucracy of the central government on its own. It had to be propelled, it had to be excited, it had to be brought in by an external challenge. We open up, when we look at the opening years of after independence, we see that the information minister at that time was Pandit B.V. Keskar. Pandit Keskar's contribution to the revival of classical music, to the revival of certain very, very important genres is undeniable. Without him, classical music would never have left the cloisters of temples and courts. There is no doubt about it, we salute him. But here Dr. Keskar, Pandit Keskar, played a completely negative role. 60 years away, we can take a neutral look. To Pandit Keskar, regarded Hindi film songs as cheap and vulgar. It was a strong value judgment which many of the seniors of our generation held. And he felt that Akashvani should be concentrating on the classical and Sugam Sangeet, as he called it. Very interestingly, the director of Sugam Sangeet was Anil Biswas, who himself was the composer of some of the finest lyrics of Hindi cinema. That is one of the interesting twists. Under Dr. Keskar's very observation was a man who was subverting what he stood for. These are parts of history that one could look back at. Now, this starts with a small studio in Kolaba. I went and met Mr. Amin Sayani, a person whose voice all of us remember, like Devdulal Bandyopadhyay, as a part of our history, as a part of our heritage. Amin Sayani in his late 80s, early 90s, sprightly and fighting fit. Sayani told me that they started what was known as Radio Advertising Services, RAS. And this RAS was basically a software producing, a song aggregating unit that was started in Kolaba, and how it started using the means of Radio Ceylon. One question, why Ceylon? Why Ceylon? Why not something else? Well, the choice was that since Akashvani was the monopolist of radio waves in India and had banned Hindi film songs, somebody else had to do it. Now let's take a quick look. The Radio Ceylon was incidentally the headquarters of what was called the South Asia Command. So this is something that perhaps you would be knowing better. There are many contributions that our Excellency has made, which cannot be fully analyzed in the public domain now. But the South Asia Command was the radio from which the British Empire carried on anti-British propaganda, countering anti-British propaganda that have spread all over Southeast Asia. Don't forget, Singapore had fallen, Burma had fallen. They needed a force that could go against it. After the war, his capacity was lying underutilized. And Ceylon till then never thought it was not part of the Indian ethos. So Amin Saini was drafted, and Amin Saini has very interesting tales about how he comes in. His mother was a friend of Jawaharlal Ji, and he was told to go to Akashvani. He reported there, he was given the job of a PM. That was what he was offered. And he quietly accepted the salary and started working, but not as a PM, but on the desk. There are many others who have contributed, but let us focus on one particular charismatic person, like Amin Saini, to get our story rolling. This was a period, and from that time, Radio Ceylon's journey begins with Binata Geetmala, if you recall, and then it would move on to Sitaro Ki Mehfil, Geetmala Ki Chhayon Mein, and such other iconic programs. Its monopoly was between 52 and 57. 57, it would all turn. What happened was that by 57, there was a groundswell against Dr. Pandit Keskar's views. Harindranath Chattopadhyay and many others just slashed him in parliament. He said, who are you? Who is government to determine what I should hear? And then we will come to 1957 when Vivid Bharati starts. But before that, let us for a minute come to the core of the subject. Why on earth do we need Hindi film songs? Why on earth are we deifying a common denominator of popular culture to a cultic proportion, to a cultic level? That's a simple point, because we need to question ourselves. Now, the Congress was very clear that Hindi, in its chaste Sanskritic form, which was the largest language in the 1931 census, would become the national language of India. The person who did not agree with the Congress's version of what India stood for, or what India understood, was Mahatma Gandhi. So you have very interesting dialectics of correspondence and writings during that period, when Mahatma Ji, who understood the soul of India far better than many others, opted for Hindustani. The Congress decided on Hindi. And then the official language of the department would start off. Now, if we go for a minute into the background, we'll see we are celebrating the 101st year of cinema in India. It started with the Marathi one and then moves on. Today, India is the largest producer of films. I'm repeating, the largest producer of films in the world. 3,500 is our average number, out of which Hindi films account for about 1,000. The number varies from year to year. And what is more, if I may use the word now, tragic, is that most of the regional films have started becoming clones of Hindi and forms of entertainment. That is also to be taken into account. Having said that, the size of the industry as we stand today is about 13,000 crores and is moving to become 20,000 crores in 3 years' time. That is the strength and the clout of one of the most successful film industries in the world. But our topic is not films. We are not talking about action, visuals, stars. We are talking of what was the takeaway from the table. What did we get from it? Sound makes an entry into Indian films on the 14th of March, 1931. And believe me, an Indian phenomenon was born without much thought. The first film comes out with 12, the next one comes out with 32 songs, the next, I forget the minor details, one can always look up. It bursts with songs. This is a phenomenon that very few countries in the world would understand. Why do you need so much song? That has also bothered me at times, because if one who looks at good cinema or Hollywood or some other genre of cinema would see that songs certainly don't occupy the centrality of stage. Why do they do so in India? My friend Chandan Mitra has an interesting theory, and for once I think he's right. Chandan writes about what he calls the Indian tradition of narration. He says that verse is a very late development. Prose is a very late development. Verse has been our mainstay, our staple diet. Verse and lyrics. If you look back at our history, you will find that to understand the Rig Veda, we use the Samved. Samved would be setting the Rig Veda to lyrics and meter. We would remember it far better. So poetry, lyrics, music has been part of our existence much more, of our public communication much more than any other country in the world. Every Roman minstrel would move around, and every religion used the ballad singer, whether it be the Muslim Sufi who would have a chamor in his hand and ghumru on his feet, to everyone in India was using music as a vehicle of communication. There it got into our genes. I mean, that is my submission, and as I said, I don't agree with Chandan in all accounts, but on this one, I do. Here, the largest contribution, and the most significant contribution to putting music on its proper foot would be R.K. Films. 1948, hiring two persons, two very interesting personalities, one called Shankar, the other Jaikishan. Shankar Jaikishan, R.K. Films, and scriptwriters, songwriters like Hasrat Jaipuri, Shailendra. Raj Kapoor was very clear in his mind what he wanted. His finger on the pulse of the people was far more effective than many others. R.K. Films would change how music in Indian cinema would be viewed. It's my humble submission that we accept the phenomenon as one that has created a public imagination in India, without getting into the intellectual argument as to whether it is good or bad. We look upon reality as a reality. We discuss whether it was good or bad later. The main movers of the Hindi cinema, filmmakers, actors, singers, music composers, all brought in their cultural identities. Now this is where Bombay differed from Calcutta. Calcutta took the lead much before Bombay to bring on good film. Films that would debate on essential dialectics, dialogues, and contradictions within human nature, the relationship between man and woman, and such other finer topics. The Hindi or the Mumbai cinema had no such pretension. From day one, it was a product of the environment of Mumbai or Bombay, where folk culture would be creeping in like the wet soil affecting a porous pot. At every level, Bombay had never stopped from getting more and more folk influences. There's a story of how Shalil Chaudhary would be impressed by Goan music that's put on his radio, stops and picks up those Goan music, and they become super hits. Goan folk songs, I mean, it has never stopped at Nautanki, Lavani. Lavani we would find to be some sort of a, maybe a bit too much on the popular side. But where Bombay is concerned, Lavani was okay, Nautanki was okay, everything was okay, as long as it produced entertainment. This one will be followed, and then Bombay never stopped, never even looked at the Hindi language as Hindi language. It used Hindustani, it used colloquium, it used even Bombaya terms. And that is the essence of its eclectic approach, its success. This is the period of the 1950s and 60s. Just a minute, we look back and find Anil Biswas, C. Ramachandran, S.D. Burman, Naushad at their creative best. So here was an alternate culture that was flowering up. And here was a state radio service saying, "Hey, this is all Laralappa." And we'll move on. Now, many studies have been made about it. I have made a few comments in my paper. Those who are more interested can find out what were the percolating influences that strengthened Bombay cinema. But let's move on because our subject is what the music of Bombay cinema would do and how. Then I've gone on to what I call the story of Vivid Bharati, a part of which I've already narrated to you. And then we come to the opening, to the surrender of Akashvani in the face of Parliament and other texts. This surrender takes place on the 2nd of October, a very significant date, 1957. 1957, a service would be started that would later on acquire the name of Vivid Bharati. It would start with just 5 hours. Just 5 hours of broadcasting. Close to 4 hours would be dedicated to Hindi film songs. Let us not make Vivid Bharati coterminous with Hindi film songs. Vivid Bharati had much more content. But it rode on this wave of the popularity of its songs. It had much more. It had agriculture. The agricultural revolution was spread on its shoulders. It had many things else. But if you look at that landscape, you'll see why this radio waves were required for songs. Submission 1. A cinema hall was an expensive proposition, and every town had just a limited number. People would refer to their residences in terms of the hall, next to Priya, next to Savitri, next to Regal. It was a center place, and this honor has been appropriated by the mall, just from the hall to the mall. Now, we have that particular living entity, but the halls could not take in more than 1 to 2%. If you look at the audience capacity and the turnover, they could never take in more than 1 or 2% of India. Well, if the halls couldn't take it, you had gramophone records. Gramophones were also a very costly proposition. If we had to wait for the masses to reach, we'd have to wait till 1960s and 70s when the cassette would come. Between 40 and 70s, late 70s, there were 2 developments. One was the opening of the radio waves of Akashvani and its increasing popularity and numbers in spread. This was what I call the democratization of music, unshackling of music in India. This created a tapestry of unity. Not all songs were good, but those that are part of our heritage today. Not all lyrics were good, but those that are stand as a part of our unificatory process. Today, when we look back, we have a common stock of memory to which we can directly relate. We cannot talk on some topic, on each and every topic with each and every person, but we can always relate to the common experience that that period produced through the lyricism, the music, the attraction, and the entire magnetism of song. And then we move on to the other details, as I said. Now, the next development that is interesting to note, why was Vivid Bharati? The name was chosen, it started with All India Variety Program. That sounded too English. So they looked around, and remember at that point of time, every film personality, every personality in the world of culture was something or the other in Akashvani. So they got together and came up with a name, Vividitha, that is variety, and Bharatiyata. And this is how I've got the resolution. And the next major development is 10 years after this, when commercial broadcasting started. Along with it came advertisements, jingles, and others to come in. I think one of the jingles I remember was Borodin. This is the way it could then get further revenues, but as usual, my predecessors in Akashvani Doordarshan had a very poor view of this commercialization that had been taken up. Even those in the Ministry of I&B wrote very strongly against it. Their advertisers will make use of All India Radio to sell low-cost, mass-produced items. There you are. The wisdom of the age. But what is the time when this service would gain immense popularity? 1962. the first major war that we faced after independence, comes what we call Jayamala. Jayamala was started as a service for those who were fighting on the front, and it is inaugurated by Nargis, Lata Mangeshkar, and quite others. As I said, the soul of India was fused together with sentiment and unity, patriotic fervor, and a common culture to look back at. This is how the development of Akashvani and Vivid Bharati takes place. Then comes the next challenge, FM. I'll just touch upon it for a minute. FM was looked upon as a challenge. First of all, remember, from 1977, 78 to 1990, that's 2000, FM was a monopoly of Akashvani. Rainbow and Gold. It was a monopoly. It's only in 1990 that FM was opened up. For me, FM was not a challenge. It was just an additional method of carrying airwaves. I am now insisting on FM for all radio services. The reason being, shortwave has died down. Medium wave is on its way out. FM can be picked up by 900 million, 90 crore Indians own mobile handsets out of 127 crores. Out of this 90 million or 90 crores, 78 to 80 million have activated sets. That means they are still operational. And every one of them can tune in to frequency modulation. So unless we move on to FM, FM should not be confused with Radio Mirchi or Rainbow Gold. Rainbow Gold or Radio Mirchi is one form of entertainment that can come up on that frequency. Everything can come up. Akashvani's primary service, which is now suffering, can come up on FM and will come up on FM. This is the story of how we move along. And till today we were making studies. We find that, to our horror, that Vivid Bharati is least heard in 4 metros. And we went into the mystery to find out somebody forgot to put FM transmitters there. We are now getting over it. 4 FM transmitters will be put in the 4 metros by the end of this year, so that along with medium wave, which has a limited clientele, it can be heard on All India Radio as well. Before I end, I must give you a very interesting